As we enter this third session of our study on Mark, we'll be looking at chapters 9 through 12. But let's start by reaching back to those last verses of Mark chapter 8. The interaction at Caesarea Philippi is the pivotal point of Jesus' journey in Mark. He's been doing signs and wonders up till then, and in many cases keeping secrets. But at Philippi, an odd location in the north country above the Sea of Galilee, known for its early pagan worship of the god Pan, he opens himself up more fully. This place was not recommended for good little Jewish boys. It's a fascinating geologic site even today. I would recommend that you do some study on it, do a little research, and find out more about this particular place. It's very interesting. It is here in this pagan place, about as far away from core Judaism as you can get, that he claims himself, at least to his disciples, when he says, "And who do you say that I am?" Then, as it is said, he turns his face toward Jerusalem. He begins to redefine who Messiah is. And what does that mean for him and for his disciples? First, he goes to the mountain, and we get a bird's eye view of the divine revelation at the Transfiguration, placing him among the law and the prophets. He is God's Son, but don't tell anyone. He begins to state the Passion story and how they and we must die to self, just like Jesus did in Jerusalem, in our Jerusalems. If we wish to follow him as disciples, he tells us what that means. This section from chapter 8:31 to chapter 10:45 is often called the Discipleship section. This consists of three passion predictions, the misunderstanding of the disciples, and finally, the teachings of discipleship. These three units take place in the Galilean area as the southward journey begins. Section 4 tells us of Jesus and his disciples as they come closer to Jerusalem. And in chapter 11, all the action is in or very near this city on 7 hills, the center of Judaism's religion and government. We find what we know as Holy Week in that chapter. There are hints of his kingship publicly, but this is not declared until his second entry into Jerusalem, the day after Palm Sunday. It is in this section that we find his confrontations coming on to him in earnest, and that continues through chapter 13, which you'll study later. His opponents are named in several sections in this area as the Pharisees, the Herodians, and the Sadducees. He takes on their trick questions and is pretty crafty himself with his answers. He continues to teach onlookers and his disciples by parables, using everyday people and things, a primary rabbinic teaching tool, and not considered to be taken literally. This is a mistake that we often make with these many years later, since the writings and times of the early rabbinic literature. This is an overview of chapters 9 through 12. I'd urge you to read this portion of Mark with your own Bible commentaries and these section notes at hand to guide you to a real emphasis of these chapters. Try not to get too bogged down into the signs and wonders. They are fascinating, and we enjoy the Jesus stories. But let's see them as teachings through them to the core of who he is and why he is. Yes, he is the Son of God, and as Son of Man, he is called to death. At heart, he is preparing the way on discipleship for each of us, as he did for those first called. For now, I'd like to invite you to respond with me to some of the so whats found in these chapters. However, each of us needs to choose what they mean for us as current followers of Christ. They are guides for your thoughtful response, personal and corporate, as you have discussions online. They are indeed our so whats on our own faith journey. The Transfiguration. We pretty much prefer the warm and fuzzy mountaintop experiences, don't we, than the ones that tell us we have to suffer, die, even if we do rise with Christ. That's what the disciples found out on the Transfiguration. They did not understand. Healings and prayers. Yes, we are to pray for healing, both the recipients and our own. Our faith story enters in, and oftentimes we can't understand the biblical stories of those who were healed without faith, but we are to trust. Isn't it really the point, regardless of whose faith it is, isn't it really the point to take them to the source, to take them to Jesus? Then the teachings on greatness. Do we still need to be taught what greatness really is? Jesus measured it not in success, but by servanthood. He shows that strength is vulnerability. His teachings still turn these questions upside down. Many teachings and questions throughout the chapters. His adversaries asked questions about legal things, and his answers were about divine things. His thoughts were revolutionary to both the Jewish authorities and to their Roman overseers. Do we still focus on specific legalities, or does he yet call us to hear the divine voice in issues of leadership and relationship? Then there are the practicalities of life, love, and money. The followers and opponents often want him to give specific instructions, as he answers with, "Put God first." So often we are distracted by trying to apply each and every teaching to every person, and Jesus is telling us, prioritize, individualize. Maybe one is distracted by money, then set it aside. Maybe another is distracted by relationship, then treat the other well, but put Christ first. We are to let things, and maybe even people, go down our list a little bit if they interfere with our relationship and our ability to follow Christ. The disciples. Even though we focus what seems to be to us the stupidity of the disciples, Jesus persevered with them. Jesus continued to call them to see and be like him. Though they seem to be slow learners very often, they continue to follow. Early theologian John Calvin says, thinking of their fear of the future, and I quote, "Now, although this fear was wrong in many respects, yet their following of Christ was a sign of no common allegiance and piety. It would, of course, have been better if they had hurried swiftly and without regret to wherever the Son of God wanted to lead them. But their reverence deserves praise, for they would rather do violence to themselves than desert him." Thank you, Mr. Calvin, for that definition. These texts do not excuse them or us, but invite both to stumble along as the Lord's shaky servants, if you will, such says commentary writer Lamar Williamson. Bartimaeus. I'd like to name him particularly as a disciple and open up a little time with him on this encounter. I would urge you to spend more time with him in the scriptures, more than we have for this video. He represents so much more than an individual along the path. The early readers, the first readers of Mark, would have recognized that he was a symbol for so many. You see, he sat outside the church, so to speak. Jesus saw something in him that we do not. He was ready. He was ready to be with Jesus. Others, including the disciples, saw him as a stumbling block along the path. But Jesus heard his faith. While some of us, disciples of Christ, continue to stumble and to ask irrelevant questions, Jesus saw and heard Bartimaeus and his persistence, and he showed himself as a model of faith. He is not only a recipient of healing, but he is a witness to Jesus, and he desired to be with him fully. Who better to tell the story of Christ than one who is blind and now can see? Fig leaves and temples. Well, let's not get distracted by Jesus cursing that tree. It's an analogy of the temple, folks. That's what it is. It has showy leaves and no fruit. Some have thought that this was a supportive statement for anti-Semitism. No, it's about greedy and prideful leadership. Dare we apply that to our houses of worship in 2013? A word on authority. The confrontation and teachings in the latter part of our readings are not to be seen as the human, temperamental side of Jesus, which is often thought to be. He is being confronted by the authorities, civil and religious. He calls them to account, just like the prophets of old. They are calling him out in fear of losing their earthly authority. His authority, on the other hand, is found in the kingdom of God, based on hearing, repenting, believing, accepting, and following. Do we still today want to question his right to ask us to deny self? Sometimes his answers are silence, and sometimes, often, his answer, as it was to the authorities, is, "Answer me." Jesus continues his journey to the cross and is yet asking us to follow. He calls us to stop stalling. Let us now not continue to ask trick questions about life, death, and eternity. Are we yet so worldly and earthbound that we miss the power of the resurrected life? In chapter 12, the great commandment is given, and our discipleship is the grateful response. With our Jewish brothers and sisters, we say the Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength. The ultimate question Jesus has for us is, who do you say that I am? Is our answer in the widow, or is it in the scribe? Or as we study this week, let us read several times and ponder chapter 12, 35 through 44. The widow and the mark in Jesus are our models for discipleship. Thank you. Have a good time studying.